think I found quite possibly the dumbest quarantine requirement buried in a 3-year-long overdue access to information filing with the Public Health Agency of Canada. Today, I'll show you the documents to prove it. I want to show you this fun little tidbit of absolute government hypocrisy I found in a long overdue access to information filing. In fact, it's remarkable. This access to information filing is 3 years overdue, and the government didn't even bother to take an extension or inform me that they were taking an extension, which is normal, standard practice. Actually, it's required. These people just never sent the documents to me, and they never explained why until they just turned up one day. If you want to support our access to information filings, please visit rebelinvestigates.com to make a donation. We rely on your support and not government funding from Justin Trudeau to hold the government to account. Now, this week, as I said, I received these documents with no explanation whatsoever about why it took 1,000+ days. It was just, here you go, Sheila. No accountability whatsoever for withholding these documents from me. Now, these documents, as I said earlier, are from the Public Health Agency of Canada about the closure of the Canadian border. Now, buried in these documents that I am still going through is a bureaucrat having the foresight to consider the fact that several demographic classes of Canadians cross the border every single day, including those for work. But in these particular documents, the bureaucrats raise the issue of Canadian students who cross the border to attend university in the United States. I suspect, although the bureaucrats never quite say, that these could be students who live in Windsor but go to school in Detroit. And what's remarkable in all of this is how nonsensical the restrictions were on students, as in there really weren't restrictions, but the government claimed there were restrictions, and so they could say they were following the letter of the law while absolutely not following the letter of the law. And of course, they were not following their own logic about how they told us quarantines were supposed to work. At the time of these documents, Canadians returning from the United States were subject to a 14-day isolation quarantine. But how is that supposed to work for students who cross the border for school every day? Well, look at this from the documents. The instructions are to inform Canadian students crossing the border daily to study in the United States that they have to self-quarantine upon their return to Canada. They're allowed to leave the next morning to go back to school. What? But the 14 days start all over every day. These instructions were provided to the field after many discussions with our colleagues at the Public Health Agency of Canada, who are lead on the quarantine. Okay, so let's try to make sense of this. If you're a Canadian student who crosses the border for school, you need to quarantine upon return to Canada, which you probably do every single night after school. But according to the Public Health Agency of Canada, you can actually go to school the next day in the United States as normal, and begin your quarantine after school again. So your quarantine requirement restarts each day after school, but you're allowed to go back to school to cross the border the next day. And you can just keep delaying your quarantine until, I guess, the end of the school year, if I'm reading this correctly. How does that make any sense? But if you were a long-haul trucker who sits alone in the cab of his truck, you were a disease vector the moment you crossed the border, subject to very real livelihood-killing quarantines. Follow the science, they told us. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. I'm continuing to go through these documents that were delayed for upwards of 1,000 days, and I will file for more documents, as I always do. If you'd like to support our research and filing costs here at Rebel News, please consider making a donation at rebelinvestigates.com. And thanks in advance to everybody who makes this boring, albeit important work possible.